right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another beautiful Saturday on Bold TV, a program that discusses disability-related issues powered by Bold Hearts Network, or a network of beautiful, outstanding ladies with disabilities. And today we are here once again to inform and educate you on another issue that relates to disability, specifically women and girls with disabilities. Today we'll be talking about setting boundaries. Setting boundaries. I know many times we hear the word boundaries, and the first thing that comes to mind is a fence or some kind of structure that either keeps in people or keeps people out. So today we are going to talk about how persons with disabilities can set boundaries, what boundaries are, and everything that has to do with that topic. But first of all, before we proceed, we've been on air for 2 years now. This month makes us 2 years on Bold TV, and we are proud of the achievements, how far we've come. We are grateful to our partners for all those who have stood by us past 2 years, our discussants, those who have always answered the call to come on the show to speak. And we are grateful to our online audience. Thank you so much for always being there, tuning in and watching every episode. So for us to continue doing this good work, we still solicit for support. We need your support. We have to pay for subscription to be able to stay on air, to use the app Zoom. So we solicit for your support, and we look forward to partnering with you. If you want to come on air, you come on the program to join us in discussing topics, you're welcome. Reach out to any of the co-hosts, Freki, myself, Tomisin, Biose, or Osaki, and we will get back to you and let you know the details. And before I move on to the topic for today, I'd like to give my fellow discussants the opportunity to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everybody. Feels good to be back. My name is Oluwatomi Adeyefa, based in Abeokuta, the state capital of Ogun State. I'm a broadcast journalist, a sound engineer, a disability and gender rights advocate, a sexual and reproductive health advocate, a member of the Bold Heart Initiative, and it feels good to be here once again. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Freki Andresen. I'm based in Port Harcourt in River State. I'm a Bold Hearts member, founding ED of Faith Care Foundation, also a public health professional. I use a wheelchair from spinal cord injury, and yes, it's always a pleasure to be on Bold TV. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I am your host for today. My name is Afeom Itum. I'm a medical lab scientist. I'm based in Uyo. I use a wheelchair, survivor of spinal cord injury, and I'm a member of Bold Hearts Initiative. So we are glad to have you with us. To our online audience, we look forward to your comments and contributions to the topic. And to those, who will be watching us, replays and, subsequently, please feel free to drop your comments. If you have contributions to the topic, feel free to do so, because somebody somewhere will benefit from it. All right, let's move to our topic. Today we talk about boundaries. We're going to start by laying a foundation. What are boundaries? Are boundaries physical? Are they visible or invisible? That's what we are going to try to deconstruct today. So I'll start with you, Freki. What are boundaries?
Thank you for the question. When you consider the word or the term boundaries, like you had said in your introduction, what comes to mind is that limitation that comes from securing a space. And indeed, that is what boundaries are, especially when you consider it in the different types. It is you setting a limit to how much a person can come into your space, depending on the kind of space. Can be any space, can be a personal space, can be your physical space, It can be any space, but it has is you intentionally setting a limit to how much a person or a thing or whatever has access to your space. So that's my definition of boundaries. Boundaries are the limits you place or the barriers that you place that limit how much a thing, a person, anything can have access to your space. Thank you very much.
All right. Boundaries, limits. Reminds me of, when you watch, there's a saying that you can go this far and no further. So boundaries have to do with, okay, don't go beyond this point. It's like drawing a line, like when we're young, when somebody will come and you say, if you cross this line, something will happen. So that's what boundaries are all about. Oluwatomisin, please, let's hear your views on boundaries. What do you understand by the word boundary?
Well, boundaries are barriers. They are walls that you create personally to guide your space and sanity. Boundaries are meant to deal with interference to your own private space or your public life. It's meant to create that pattern whereby people do not take you for granted, whereby people do not just tramp on you, people do not just take advantage of your vulnerability. It helps to protect that part of you that is very vulnerable. So boundaries are self-created. You create them yourself. You know your limits, you know what you can take, you know what you do not want around you. And so you put those preventive mechanisms in place to ensure that those things that you like are the things that comes to you, and those things you do not like don't come near you, as it were. So for me, in addition to what Freddie said, that is boundary.
Okay. So from what both of you have said, I can pick out some keywords: limits, barriers, security, protection. All of these words are connected to boundaries, because a boundary is supposed to, it's all about, one other thing that, I think people should know is that a boundary is not about other people. Setting boundaries is about yourself. It's about protecting you. It's about keeping you safe. It's about, creating that secure space, that safe environment for yourself, and filtering, it serves as a filter to what, can come in, so that it protects you from any external influence that does not serve you well. That is what a boundary is. Frankie, I'd like you to kind of specify, what are the types of boundaries that we have? What are the types of boundaries that exist?
All right, thank you very much. So when you consider boundary, the first thing that comes to mind is the physical one, where you tell someone, for example, and I really like what you said, that when we talk about boundaries, we're not talking about, you can't set boundaries with somebody because you do not know the person's life or limits or purpose. But boundaries really is about you. So coming back to the question, the first that comes to mind is the physical one, where you literally do not want someone in your space, like no. So there's a physical boundary, and that has to do with maybe physical contact, limiting physical contact. In fact, where maybe it comes to a place where a person is completely, maybe has to be blocked from a person for a while, just for, so physical boundaries. Another type is emotional, where you are guiding your mind, like in scripture, your heart and mind. So for me, those are the most, there are other ones, but these are the two broad ones: physical boundaries, and then emotional boundaries. Thank you.
All right. So is there anything you want to add?
Maybe an aside, I would say, okay, she said social boundaries, economic boundaries. Economic boundaries. Let's also forget that Countries, states also set boundaries, you know. Entities, they set boundaries, maybe for corporate reasons, security reasons, and all of that. So those are other forms of boundaries we may consider, maybe not for the sake of this conversation, but we might just have that at the back of our mind.
Okay. All right. I like that. You know, physical boundaries, emotional boundaries. I like the economic boundaries. And I like to say that for the economic boundaries, letting people know how much you can afford to let go of. But that's by the way. I think we're going to move on to our next question now. And that is, what are the benefits of setting boundaries? You know, many people may not realize, you know, why it's important. Why do I need to keep people out? Why do I need to tell people don't come this, you know, don't come in, don't, you know, get too close? You know, shouldn't I be getting acquainted with people? Shouldn't I be trying to get, you know, chummy with more people? So why do I need to set boundaries? And I'd like us to, you know, take that focus on persons with disabilities and especially women with disabilities. Why do we need to set boundaries?
We need to set boundaries as women with disabilities for many, many, many reasons. First, we are women, and then you add the disability, it becomes women with disability. It means that for each of those labels, you need to protect yourself. And so the first thing you're setting boundaries for is to protect yourself, for your self-security, for you not to be vulnerable at every point in time. Because I mean, things come to you, people come to you, situations arise, and if you are not setting boundaries, if you are not knowing your limits first to start with, you may not be able to know how to respond or deal with those people, those situations when they arise. Another reason you need to set boundaries is for your own emotional health. Depression is real. People get sad every day. Happiness is also real. So you need to choose, which do you want? In what circle do you want to be found? Do you want to be sad? Do you want to be depressed? Do you want to be happy? Do you want to be joyful? So in order to achieve either of all of this, you need to set boundaries. I mean, the lack of you not setting boundaries opens you up to a lot of external forces, to a lot of things that can damage your existence, things that can damage your physical and emotional health. So we also need to set boundaries because of our emotional health, to stay sane. Because I mean, you need to stay sane to be a woman with disabilities that has risen above all forms of discrimination, stigmatization, abuse, and all of that. So you need to just put yourself together and know where to be found. So I think those two reasons are very important for us to consider as why we should set boundaries.
All right, so for our emotional health, making sure that, you know, protecting one's mental health is very important, especially as women with disabilities. It's hard enough, the double disadvantage of being a woman and living with a disability. It's hard enough, and then, you know, not to not add to that by, you know, exposing yourself to negative influences that can further worsen, you know, your mental states.
Oh, yes. So we've had emotional health, protecting emotional health, and protecting mental health. Okay, so I'll add 2 or 3 more. So the first one I would say is that setting boundaries is beneficial for women with disabilities or persons with disabilities. Remember when Thomasin talked about increased vulnerabilities that come because of one's disability and one's gender as a woman. These are realities. And of course, when those interact, they still even further increase in vulnerabilities. So for women with disabilities, why would it be so crucial to set boundaries formally, in addition to the 2 that have been mentioned, is that in forming boundaries, in setting boundaries, you discover who you are. You are able to have a sense of identity as a person. so that you are not everything to all men or to all people. Setting boundaries helps you on the journey of self-discovery. Number two, for me, as in addition to, and another good reason why we should set boundaries is that one of the things that not setting boundaries does is that you will be trying to be pleasing everybody, and it can lead to burnout because you are trying to prove something because of disability. It happens, and then you find that you have burnout. So setting boundaries can help you to preserve yourself, and that's what we call self-care. So it helps you to take your care as a priority because you're not trying to please everyone and do everything, even when it's not convenient. And then the last one, it's the last one for the sake of the conversation, one more spring, is that it can lead to what we call codependency. That codependency may not necessarily be a bad thing. It can be a terrible thing when a person with disability is not able to now do anything, make any informed decision, or move on with their life without being dependent on another person to help the person in making that decision. That's because the person has no boundaries whatsoever. Setting boundaries gives you what we call autonomy, which every person with disability should strive for. There's a place for making informed consent when it affects your life. And setting boundaries, learning yourself, helps you to be able to have that level of autonomy so that you're not overly codependent on either a caregiver or a parent or an intimate partner. So these are some of the benefits of setting boundaries. Thank you.
All right, thank you. You raised some amazing points. And one of those, when you talked about codependency, setting boundaries it boosts independence. When you set boundaries, it helps you to also step back and evaluate where you are, be able to assess yourself and, also see how you can, live to the fullest without, having to depend on other people so much. I know, yes, you cannot, avoid depending on others, but it helps you discover how much and how far you can go. And then when you talked about self-discovery, boundaries have to do with identity. Setting boundaries is key to this, having an identity. It means you recognize who you are. You've come to know yourself. You know what works for you. You know what's best for you. And you choose that over what anybody else wants for you. I give an example. Many people, recently a colleague of mine kept saying, oh, you can't stay alone. You need somebody with you. She went as far as suggesting, okay, if I don't want, to get a maid, I should get a man. And I'm like, how? I should just grab a man somewhere and tell him, man, the Bible says, and she even quoted scripture, a man is not meant to be alone. And I'm like, okay, I hear you. Sister, I love my life. Let me be on this solo journey. I had to make her understand that, yes, as much as I knew she was coming from a place of concern and, that she still had to respect my choice for myself, that I knew I put a lot of thought into the decision I made. And so, we would just have to agree to disagree. So boundaries does not mean, you would, having conflict. It just means choosing you over everything and everyone else, putting yourself first. And it is a very key part of self-care. Choosing you over everything and everyone else. Knowing what makes you happy and choosing to do that over anything else that may be going on around you. It's making happiness a choice. That's what setting boundaries is all about. So now, I know we've talked about some of the consequences, but I'd just like us to focus on that now. The consequences of not setting boundaries. What are some things, like practical things that can happen in relationships, either in the family, in intimate relationships, in the workplace, when boundaries are not set? What are some of the things that can happen? What are some scenarios that can play out when persons with disabilities or women and girls with disabilities do not set specific boundaries? Frankie.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. So it's for me, it's pretty easy to see that if a person does not set boundaries, I've said this, you become all things to all men and you get tired. You find yourself that you're tired all the time because you're trying to be a person pleaser. So if this person comes, you're like, "Ugh." If this person comes, you're like that. And this is not just for let's say any form type of relationship. This happens especially in intimate partner relationships. In fact, there was a time a girl was like, she doesn't even know who she is because with this boyfriend, she's like this. With another one, she's like this. She adjusts, she doesn't know whether she has identity because as they come, she does adjust herself to how the guy is. And I was like, that is a lady who is lost. That means where there's no man, or where there is, yes, man, that was her partner. So where there is no partner, she's lost because she doesn't know who she is. And that is a great disadvantage of not knowing who you are. You see, like, we cannot know who we are, but at least we are the person that knows ourselves more than anybody else. And if you have lost that opportunity to know yourself more than another person, then voila. So another one is, I've talked about being tired all the time. That's burnout because you're trying to do everything. I've talked about influence. When you don't know yourself and you have to be a certain way in this relationship and a certain way in that relationship, it means that other people have more influence. And the disadvantage of that is that negative influence would affect you quicker or faster or easier if you don't have boundaries. So it's easy for somebody to come and convince you that, you that maybe do not used to drink, that what are you doing? What are you doing? Or if Avion did not have her boundaries, for example, and then the person came and now, imprinted and impressed and convinced, she would now probably go and find what we call man. So not having boundaries can help you to go into decisions that you would otherwise on a good day never take. So I'll stop here and allow the conversation to continue. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much. Tomisin, you want to add to that?
Yes, I was having a conversation. Okay, it was at the salon last week, and then somebody said, that's how we women will be shrinking. We'll be shrinking. We will shrink until we are shrunk.
Yeah.
And so that was exactly the way she said it. So you shrink until you are shrunk. I'm like, wow. So, I mean, when you don't have boundaries, if you don't stand for anything, you fall for everything and anything, as it were. People can easily manipulate you, not even convince you. Some people will not even convince you. They will manipulate you to do the unthinkable. And at the end of the day, you'll be looking at yourself like, did I really actually, in my right frame of mind, do this? And that's because you don't have boundaries. If you also do not have boundaries, you expose yourself to a lot of external and negative vibes. A lot of negativity would be around you because, I mean, you take everything and anything anybody says, hook, line, and sinker without giving it a second thought. If you also do not have boundaries, you fall victims, you fall prey of either unsuspecting or suspecting, you fall prey. You just, at any little time, you are falling down the cliff because, I mean, you've not learned to guard your space jealously. If you do not also have boundaries, if you do not know how, realize how to set boundaries, you would also notice that you lose your self-esteem because in a bid to please everybody, when you get tired, you begin to live in other people's shadows. You begin to follow in their footsteps. You lose yourself, which is the real self. You lose it in the process. Your courage, your boldness continues to shrink until it can no longer shrink and all of that. So not having boundaries is a whole lot of negativity. Trust me, it's a whole lot of negativity.
All right, thank you so much. So you've said a lot. Reki mentioned burnout, and that means taking on more than you should, not knowing when to say no, not knowing when to stop. And, women are guilty of this because we've been conditioned to give, give, give. Oh, I love my children. So whenever they so much as cough, I jump. Whenever there's somebody, I jump. You don't know when to say no. Oh, visitors are coming to the house. I'm all over the place. Oh, this one is this. And you give so much, but you don't stop to, actually stop and ask yourself, what am I doing for myself? You don't even think of yourself. You don't put yourself first because you feel that it's selfish. Let me inform everybody listening here today. Selfishness is good. It's not always a bad thing. Being selfish is not always a bad thing. You need to stop and actually put yourself first, because you can't give what you don't have. At some point, you will run out. You will be exhausted and you will have nothing to give. That's how, depression will set in. That's how you become so stressed out that, sometimes even physical symptoms will manifest. Your hair starts falling out. You start having, all manner of sicknesses. Your blood pressure goes up because you don't know how to say no. So setting boundaries, sometimes saying no, you don't need to explain yourself. If it's not okay, it's not okay. If you're not available, you're not available. Let people know, communicate your needs. So in light of that, we're going to move on to how practical ways we can set boundaries. How can women and girls with disabilities set boundaries? How do they do this? It's not just about, knowing why they should or why they should, what happens when they don't. How can they do this? What are the practical steps they can take? Preki.
One of the practical steps that one can begin to take to set boundaries is that ask yourself, what can I take and what can I not take? Because nobody can set boundaries for you. What can I take? What can I not take? What are my strengths? Those are some of the questions you may want to begin to ask yourself. These are good for setting boundaries. If you begin to ask yourself, oh, what can I take? What can I not take? That's like in a relationship. It's always good to define boundaries. I remember when we were growing up as teens, one of the things they said is, if you find that you're friends with a boy, set boundaries or define boundaries or so that you don't cross the line. Once you cross that line, you know that you cross. So for example, they now say, if before when people are gisting, he will be sitting there, you'll be sitting here, then all of a sudden, you're now sitting on his laps. And then you have already said to yourself that crossing the boundaries is when I'm sitting on his lap, and you know that you're crossed. I don't know if you get. So they made it very practical for us so that it's not like a dream when you're now 9 months later. So it's not like, so no, it's true. So say I didn't know, I wasn't sure, my body did me. So setting boundaries helps. So define relationships. So that's what I'm trying to say. So if you find yourself in an intimate relationship or a new relationship, define that relationship. Is it platonic? Is it what the other one? Intimate? Is it the other one? Is it romantic? Define it so that it doesn't take you like unawares, or even though there's a relationship that grow, but at every stage you should be able to assess it and say, okay, where are we? Or what kind of relationship is this? I think people are afraid to put a label on things or to look in depth into things. I see that for women and girls with disabilities. And so they are afraid. Another thing I'll say is that if you need to speak up to ask a question, like, what are you doing? Please ask that question. A lot of times, setting boundaries is so crucial in relationships. And a lot of times we are taken advantage of because we do not set boundaries. So if somebody is doing something you do not like, please speak up. What are you doing? Or you would have determined that you don't like that thing first. You say it still comes back to you. You've determined that I don't like this thing. So you would find courage to speak out and say, what are you doing? So that it will not turn into abuse before you know it. I'll come back to say more. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, Tomisin, thank you so much. So Preki has talked about the important thing. The first thing about setting boundaries is know yourself. Know what you're comfortable with and what you are not comfortable with. When you have defined those settings, when you have defined those, those particular options for yourself, you know, this is what I can do, this is what I cannot do, this is what I welcome, this is what I don't welcome. Then when somebody does something that falls outside of what you're comfortable with, you can then recognize that, no, this is not right. I don't like this. This is not what I want. And you can speak up and tell the person, no, I am not comfortable with this and I am asking you to stop. But if you do not, you don't even define, you know, those options and know what you want and what you don't want, then you will not be able to recognize when boundaries have been crossed because there were no boundaries to begin with. All right, Tomisin.
Okay, so in order to set boundaries also, you need to follow those limits. So in a case where you accept those limits for some people and you do not accept it for some people, sometimes you'll be confused yourself. So if this is what you can take, let it, you know, affect everyone. In situations where you have to compromise, let it be known to the other person that, yeah, this is just a compromise. And be sure that you're cool with it. I mean, in the art of negotiation, you have to be cool with whatever is being decided. So whatever you're compromising on, you have to also be cool with it. So when you're setting boundaries, for instance, I see that play out a lot in women with disabilities. You say people shouldn't call you derogatory names, demeaning names, and all of that. But you allow your friends who are also with a disability to call you those names. And then when it is someone without a disability, you revolt, you rebel, you are angry, you are upset. And so I'm saying that regardless, if you are going to say, don't do this to me, it shouldn't be a don't do this to me for some people and you can do this to me for some people. It confuses that way. Now, it makes the other person feel like the other person you're trying to correct and say, oh, I don't like it. It makes them feel like, but this other person has just done the same thing to you and you're not complaining. You're not even having, you know, any iota of anger when it's being done. So it creates a lot of confusion. It makes you look like you are not standing on your good feet. And so you need to be straightforward about your boundaries. I think that is the one other way.
Okay, so what I'm taking away from your, what you said is consistency. You can't tell people don't do this when you yourself do not even, adhere. Your boundary starts with you. You have to be the first to respect boundaries. And that means you don't cross the boundaries. And then when other people do so, you now, say, no, I'm not comfortable. Let's say, for example, you go somewhere and, somebody else, you tell yourself, oh, I don't like people, touching me in a particular way. And then you go somewhere and you now do the same to somebody else, or you put yourself in a position where that happens, by, making allowance either through your comments or the way you interact. And then somebody does that and then you now, rebel. When it comes to boundary setting, I believe persons with disability, especially women and girls with disability, we have to be vocal. Many times we feel I know the societal stereotype makes us think that, oh, somebody is nice to you and you don't, no matter how nice a person is, there's every possibility that they will cross those lines. And if you're not comfortable, tell them, no, next time do it this way. Assume the person is ignorant the first time and tell them next time, let's say, for example, someone is trying to help you get from one place to another. And then, in the course of doing that, maybe there's an inappropriate touch or, gesture. You speak out and say, no, stop. I think you should do it this way. I prefer it if you do it this way. And if the person persists, that's when you know that, then you tell the person, no, thank you. I don't think I need your help anymore. But more often than not, persons with disability, especially women and girls with disability, face abuse because, they're afraid of speaking out so that they don't lose, the help they are getting. So, and in light of that, I'd like us to speak to caregivers, family members, friends about, how they can help persons with disabilities, how they can respect their boundaries and, help them not to, by not invading or crossing those lines and invading their personal space, how they can create a safe environment for them to be able to express themselves fully.
Thanks for the question. Now, for parents and caregivers, let me speak especially to primary caregivers of persons with disabilities. Understand that the person that you're interacting with is a human being with desires, with needs. And that person also has to be respected and viewed as a person, not as a patient or as a client. Because a lot of times I've seen that the relationship sometimes that happens between caregiver and persons with disabilities looks like patient, doctor, something where the doctor is the alpha and the patient is the dust of the earth. So understand that in relating to that person is a human being with their needs. And that is not everything, that you cannot just take decisions for the person or go ahead and just, that's on behalf of the person, respond for the person. I remember a conference I went to and something happened. It was a very interesting lesson to learn. There was a sign language interpreter. I do not know, there were others. I do not know if the person was new on the job. But what happens in SLI is that an SLI automatically loses themselves. The person is there to be the voice of the hearing impaired person. And then it just happened that all of a sudden, this SLI was now answering. She kept signing, but the hearing impaired person obviously had not signed to her. And it now took the other SLI to say, are you answering for the person? Or what are you doing? Like, then I think, what are you doing? Is it your idea or what are you responding? Or you think you know the person's idea? And you could see her catch herself. And then the hearing impaired person was already livid and mad and was like, he needed that person out of that place. That's a terrible sign language interpreter. And she was now trying to beg. That's a clear example of where a person who is, supporting a person with disability forgets that that person is a person with opinions and then just takes over and begins to make decisions, respond for the person. Don't do that. That's what I'm trying to say. If you are a primary caregiver, a friend, a sibling, don't trample on a person with disability all of a sudden or think you know what the person wants because of disability. It happens all the time. That's you stepping into that person's space and taking that person's power and making decisions responding for the person. So mine is, whether you're a caregiver, whether you're a friend, whether you're a colleague at work, boss, don't do that to any person with disability. You're stepping into that person's space and it's not okay. Thank you.
Like I said earlier, if you don't stand for something, you tend to fall for everything. So as women with disabilities, I want to say that setting boundaries does not mean you're wicked. It does not mean you're an introvert. It does not mean you are not active. It does not mean you're not a nice safeguarding your own safety, your sanity, your personality, and all of that. So don't be afraid to set boundaries. Don't be shy to set boundaries. This is about you. And that is where self-care, self-worth comes into play. If you are able to take care of yourself adequately, it will be easier for you to take care of other people. So if you're able to set your own standards, your own boundaries, your limits, you're able to respect other people's boundaries, you're able to respect other people's space without any form of interference. Of course, what you do not want them to do to you, you also will not do it to other people. So don't be afraid, don't be shy. It's not a ridiculous thing. Don't let anybody tell you, oh, because I've heard a lot of time people say, especially with disability, you need help. And people forget that even when you are giving help to a person with disability, you need to also ask. We're having this conversation on was it Tuesday now? On Tuesday with a group of people, and the woman kept saying, oh, when I see persons with disability, I used to help them. I'll just take them. And then we're telling her that it is wrong for you to just take them. What if that is not what they actually need at that particular point in time? So you need to, set it so that people are aware of what you want, and people do not just, cross the line and make you feel bad and depressed at the end of the day. Because I mean, when people cross the line, you're hurt, you're hurted. So in order to protect yourself from that hurt, from that heartbreak, from that, unsafe space, don't be afraid, don't be shy to set boundaries.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode of Bold TV. Today we've talked about setting boundaries. We've talked about how persons with disabilities, specifically women and girls with disabilities, can set boundaries, what the benefits are, the consequences of not setting those boundaries. And, as a final word, I'd like to say, prioritize yourself. Let your well-being be at the top of the list of anything you want to do. Put yourself first. It's not being selfish. It's called self-care. Love yourself enough to put yourself first and look for only the best for yourself so that you can get, the happiness that you deserve. They say happiness is an inside job. That's where it starts. It starts with you. So put yourself first and decide what you want and what you do not want, so that you can communicate effectively with others. So before we go, I'd like to say thank you for being with us. To our online audience, thank you so much for being there. Drop your comments, make contributions, and I hope that today we've been able to educate you and inform you and help you to take another step into being the beautiful, outstanding lady that you are. So before we go, I'd like my fellow discussants to unmute their microphones and, say their goodbyes. And then we'll see you next week, Saturday, same time, 10:30 a.m. in the morning. Join us for another interesting episode. Bye. Goodbye. See you next Saturday.